hello, everyone. My name is Peter Dixon. I am speaking to you from sunny but cold New York City, where I teach in and direct the Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Master's Program at Columbia University. And today I'm really excited to be sharing the work of a colleague and friend, Mr. Marc Gwamaka, who is calling in from Kigali, Rwanda, who is going to be speaking to us about some really interesting work he is doing around intergenerational reintegration, recovery, rehabilitation, reconciliation. Marc is the Chief of Staff of the Aegis Trust and Kigali Genocide Memorial in Rwanda. And his presentation today is entitled Understanding Pathways of Violence, Lessons from Rwanda. The format for today will be I will hand the reins over to Marc. He will present some of his work. Then I'll come back on. We'll have a bit of a discussion, and then we'll turn to some audience questions. If you do have questions while you're listening to the presentation, there is a Q&A box where you can type your questions in. And then I will read from those to continue the conversation with Marc so that you can have your questions answered as well. So without further ado, let me pass it over to Mr. Marc Gwamaka, who will speak to us about understanding pathways of violence, lessons from Rwanda. Marc, welcome.
Thank you so much. So my
Thank you.
name is Marc Gwamaka, and I serve at the Aegis Trust and the Kigali Genocide Memorial, just like they said. Aegis Trust is a British organization that was invited in Rwanda to work and set up the Kigali Genocide Memorial. The Kigali Genocide Memorial belongs to the city of Kigali, and the then mayor, Mutsinda Shaka, invited them so that they can bring the expertise in helping us set up this museum. And it has been a center for humanity itself, going back to the past, but also looking forward. So one of the things that I'm going to talk about is part of the program that we offer the Kigali Genocide Memorial. And we'll be looking at the history of Rwanda, but also going back into the continuum of violence. Now, this framework was pretty much researched and written and explored by Arvin Staub, the gradual process leading to mass violence. And I'm going to do that. And in some places, if you can relate to your own story or your own history where you live, maybe you can note it somewhere. It could be a part of the discussion. And I'll try to bring in a few things that I know. Some of those might be the history of where you are. So buckle up. So a pathway to social destruction pretty much starts from the environment and eventually with external stuff, but that affects the internal. The first part of violence and extreme violence will be difficult life conditions. And of course, these difficult life conditions lead to the deteriorating living conditions. Of course, that will be economic, political, and social. And these set as the beginning. These stressors create a pervasive sense of insecurity and frustration within a population, laying the groundwork for hostility. And I'm going to set that by also going back in the history of Rwanda. Rwanda was a nation state by 1120, even earlier, all the way. Now it went to it was built, it had a king, it had an army, it had a taxation system, it had an education system called the Torero by then. And Rwandans had lived together for almost 900 years by the time of the genocide. And when the colonialists came in, firstly with the Germans around 1894, they get to Rwanda and they realize that this country is well structured. Now, with any Eurocentric thinking, they're like, these people cannot be well organized and well structured this way, unless if they had had any relationship with the Europeans. However, the Germans were much more interested in Europe, so they didn't put a lot of effort in Rwanda, but they did a few wrong things. For example, Dr. Eugene Fisher. They were conducting some killings in the Nam and the Ero area, but also researching about the cranial of an African, saying that it's less of that of a European. So they kill over 1,000 people in Rwanda by then. So when the World War, German loses the World War, the British and the Belgians, pretty much some invade from the north, those are the British, and some invade from the west, who are the Germans, to kick out the Germans from Rwanda because that land had been given to the Belgians. The League of Nations had given Rwanda as a protectorate of the League of Nations, and that country was to do it was Belgium, and through that they were supposed to lead Rwanda to independence. However, what happens now is as they invade the country, they pretty much destroy the economy of the country. Rwanda had not seen such a huge army coming in, huge weaponry, and then destruction at the highest level. So the environment is destroyed. A huge number of people are killed. Cattle is killed, which was a part of the economic system of the land by then, but also taking over. The food is eaten by this invading army, and they also come in with new diseases that are coming into the land. So this social structure that already existed now starts getting stressors from that point going forward. So we start seeing that the condition, be it economical, political, and social, is all destroyed. So as if that was not enough, when the Belgians take over, the power that the king had is taken away from him. The king used to be number one in the country, and the structure was very simple. Rwandans believed that there was a god, Imana, who gave them a king, and all the people were Rwanda Rwumwami, which literally meant the people of the king. And that is also destroyed because the king of Rwanda is no longer number one in Rwanda, but the king of Belgium is, and then the resident coordinator for Rwanda, Urundi, and Burundi, and then the resident coordinator for Rwanda, Burundi, and the Republic of Congo, but then the Congo, and then the resident coordinator for Rwanda and Burundi, the resident coordinator for Rwanda, and then others. So the king didn't have any power. So even politically and socially, that is destroyed. And of course, also new things come in. With the coming in of taking over the land by the colonialists and then giving it to other people, mostly people from who are actually forcing them to farm and bringing in tea and coffee. That also becomes a stressor, both to the economy of the country, but also to the people who are not eating this coffee or tea. I'm going to skip because I'll go back and forth. Now I'm skipping all the way heading to the 1950s, 1959, when the king of Rwanda, by then King Rudahigwa, was looking to seek independence for Rwanda. The Belgians were not happy with it. Firstly, he went to Belgium and he realized these people are just like us. And when he comes back, he builds his own palace that was not built by the Belgians because they had built him a small one. So he builds a bigger one for himself. The next thing he tells them, I'm going to go to the League of Nations to seek for independence. He goes to Burundi because that's where they used to give yellow fever injections. And when he gets there, he's actually injected and killed. So he dies and he comes back. So the Belgians who had wanted to get rid of the monarch pretty much find it difficult because the people say we cannot bury our king without another king as a replacement, because in our culture, a king buries a king. So as that went on, they prepared the Hutu Revolution of 1959. They worked with some elite Hutus during that point in time. And we see that in 1959, there are killings that happens of Tutsis and they start fleeing. And then 1960s, the same killings are happening. But there is something that happens. The United Nations by then gives amnesty to everyone who had done all these killings in Rwanda by then. Now, going forward, when Rwanda gains independence, we see that from 1959, with the coming up of a multi-party system and political parties coming in, most of the radical Hutus start coming up with political parties that are ethnic based. So that's why we see that people tend to turn to groups searching for protection due to these difficult conditions. Individuals who are insecure and feel threatened turn to existing groups. Those can be ethnic, religious, or ideological for support and protection. So this in-grouping part we see that the political parties that are now starting to come up in Rwanda are no longer political parties that deal with the issues of everyone, but now they're singling out a certain group. Of course, when that happens, some leaders, even when they don't meet what the standards of what they're supposed to offer, they start scapegoating, where we see the groups tend to blame some other group for their life problems. They identify others as an enemy for interfering with their vision of a better future. This shifts the focus from structural problems to tangible targets and resentment. So we see that now the propaganda that had started with the Belgians in the 1930s goes all the way, and now it's taken over by the new political parties, mostly the Hutu power political parties. Now, why did I say started by the Belgians? Because they're the ones who were dividing and ruling. Divide and rule was a system used by colonialists. And at this point in time, every blame is shifted to this group of people. So they say, first of all, they are not from here because they use the Hamitic theory. And in the Hamitic theory, they say that Tutsis were descendants of Noah. And other than the Japhesites and then the Shemites, there were Hamites who walked all the way. They were saying that Ham was cursed. So they were saying they're semi-European because they came to this part of the world and they're the ones who civilized it. Other than that, this place will not be civilized. But that is eventually going to be used as a tool to say Tutsis are not from here. And that sentiment was not only during that time in the 1930s, 1959, and all the way leading to the 1994 genocide. It's still a sentiment that is there right now in the region of the African Great Lakes region, mostly in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but it's also around this region. So we see that every issue that was happening was now scapegoated to the Tutsis. The colonialists were no longer an issue. For example, there are panels, and I think I can get some of those and share them with you, where young people were holding, banners saying, "Would rather have colonialism than have Tutsis in this country." And you can imagine how do you chase your brother that you had lived with for almost 900 years, and then you say you prefer colonialism. So every issue now is scapegoated to the Tutsis. Of course, there was systemic discrimination where the group that is being blamed continually devalued in public discourse and private thought, and the target group is pushed to the fringes of society, losing access to resources, political power, and of course, policies here are enacted that codify discrimination, making it a normal part of social order. So we see that the Tutsis are starting to be discriminated upon. Now, one of the things that happens is that the Tutsis were not allowed to join the army. But also, if they had a business, they needed to have a patron so that that patron would be the one to stand in for them. And you can imagine if there's a corrupt leader and they're taking over business, it's as if that business is not yours. Now, is it everybody? No, it's not. There are some who made it and flourished and had a lot of money. And of course, with dealings and depending on who they knew and how they worked. But the majority were not allowed to even finish primary school because on every child's ID or the parent's ID was written this ethnic group. So many of them were failed in the classrooms. And the law then stated that if you fail 3 times in primary school, then you cannot be allowed to proceed to university. And we see that now there was a lot of those who started sending their children mostly to the Democratic Republic of Congo, to Burundi, and some in Uganda, so that they can go pursue their education. But even in the army, they said that Tutsis would melt if they joined the army. They're saying if it rained on them, they would melt. So we start seeing destructive ideologies, and many of these destructive ideologies are ideologies that are led by leaders. We see leaders starting to promote a vision where life will improve if the other group is dealt with. Saying these are the problem. These people are the problem. Forget what's going on. If we get rid of this group, then our problems will be gone. You can see giving of false hope, the ideology that gives insecure population hope and a sense of collective purpose by getting rid of this group that they deem unwanted in their own communities. Shaping a future if this group is eliminated and they're not here, then our life is going to be better. So you find that some people tend to start leaving, and the purpose of their lives tends to start from there instead of having working and looking for the future. It's when we get rid of these people, then we're going to live a better life. And you'll see that in that process, for example, Mugesera, Leo Mugesera, I think in 1992, if I'm not mistaken, he talks about sending Tutsis through the River Nile back to Egypt. And they're saying that these Tutsis are not from here. They need to be sent back home, where they said Ethiopia. Now, if you look at many of those Tutsis, they were as poor as the people who are going to kill them. But now they're discriminated upon in education, but also they're saying that if they'll be gotten rid of, then the country will be better. And for some reason, the population tends to accept an increased scapegoating. So that will be, injustices that happen. And we can see injustices happening all the years, and I'll get back to that. But now every issue that is there, now they start putting it up. The other part I'll talk about will be in the 1970s, if I'm not mistaken, 1971 or 1972, they start quota systems, and they say there's this number of Hutus who should be in these political powers and this. But if that was true, then it would have worked. But the problem was, even those people who in the quota systems could not be given even those positions. Now, we also see that in classrooms, they start teaching who is a Hutu and who is a Tutsi by roll call, saying Tutsis stand up, so they'll stand up, Hutu stand up. And you can imagine these ideologies are starting to come up, but they're building them for the future. So a young person who started grade 1 when they're 6 years old, by the time 1994 comes up, which will be somewhere around 25 years later, they'll be around 26, 27 years old. And almost 12 years of their education, they have been told who is Hutu, who is Tutsi, pretty much to discriminate. But also, those ideologies also the people, where if, for example, we go back to turning into groups, you'll find that in some areas, they start pushing away those people. Some of them are moved from some areas taken to other areas. And we can talk about the United States with the redlining, where they now start pushing certain groups of people. And you can follow that trend going down to even see some of the issues that are happening. So we're looking at destructive ideologies coming in, pointing fingers and saying, hey, you are the cause of our problem. You are the source of our problem. And people tend to accept it. And then, of course, silence of bystanders. Let me call them the voice of reason. The absence of these people pretty much tends to, or their silence, not their absence, their silence, the silence of witnesses to this discrimination, physical violence, pretty much it's as if they're endorsing what's happening, and it comes up appearing to be legitimate. And the community tends to lose the voice of reason. I'll say, for example, 1959 in Rwanda, there are killings of the Tutsis. 1963, there are killings of the Tutsis. 1967, 1968, there are killings of the Tutsis. We can cross over to the 70s and the later years of the 70s, 76, 77, 78, there are killings of the Tutsis. And then all the way to 1980s, 85, 86, 87, there are killings of the Tutsis. 1990, there are killings of the Tutsis. 1992, I think 1993, and then 1994. All this time, people are being killed, and people look at it and they tend to normalize it. And I want you to think, what are some of the things that we normalize in our community that would actually tend to take people down this lane? What are some of the things that we see? I'll give you an example. I've seen young people fight and others film it, and then they post it as if it's something for entertainment. Why don't we teach these young people to be able to be upstanders so that they can say what's going on is not right? So whenever the community fails to have upstanders, the voice of reason, then those people, the community tends to think, or those who are killing people tend to think that what they're doing is right. I'll give you an example. In 1993, you look up a book by Antoine Rutaisire. I think It's About Forgiveness. I'll think about the title. My Life is Forgiveness. But Reverend Antoine Rutaisire writes about a book, and he talks about how every Christmas they used to come and kill them. And he's trying to relate those. But the most important part related to this story is this gentleman called Janvier, who was the head of the African Evangelical Enterprise. And he starts talking about what's going to happen. It's like, what's happening is not right. We need to stop. This is not right. And as he keeps on saying that, what happens is on January 7th, 1994, Janvier is killed with his entire family. That means himself, his wife, and his children, but also his father and his mother who were at his place, and some other people had come to pray. What they were doing was to make sure that they get rid of the voice of reason so that these upstanders could not even speak up. Another thing that happens is when the plane of President Habyarimana is shot down, the politicians who would have spoken up out, which I think was a little too late by that point in time, pretty much are killed. And they're killed, they're hunted to make sure that there is no voice of reason. So the absence of upstanders, pretty much, or the silence of witnesses, tends to legitimize the actions of the offenders. It will be like a bully in a community where you find somebody beating people, and then everyone looks away as if it's normal. They feel like it's legitimate and they keep on doing it. So here we see that the absence of upstanders, the silence of bystanders, the silence of eyewitnesses tends to legitimize what's going on. And you can also think about your own communities. Now, cultural characteristics. Now, these could be perceived or real. And then respect for authority. Remember, a part of the propaganda that was being propagated was that Tutsis came and took over from Rwandans. They are not from here. So they said they had taken over Rwanda from the natives. Now, if that was the case, the Hutus wouldn't have been natives either, because the Twas were considered to be natives of the land here in Rwanda. However, the propagandists made it look like these Tutsis who are from Ethiopia. Now, Ethiopia has, I think, 16 tribes. And if you look at Ethiopians and Rwandans, pretty much all Rwandans, the way they look and Ethiopians will be the same. But of course, everyone has a stereotypic look of how Ethiopians look like. So, but going back to the part of the unhealed wounds, they say that Tutsis had colonized pretty much the Hutus for all these years. Remember, now they're not even talking about Belgium. So everything that had happened that was wrong, it was done by these people. So some of those will be perceived wounds, but also there is extreme respect for authority. In Rwanda, Rwanda was very, very poor. We made a few strides now, but the community was very poor. And people respected authority like they used to respect a king. So the extreme respect for authority meant that whatever is going to be said is going to be done. Here, I can also call it absence of critical thinking, where people start asking themselves, why do I think the way that I think? What causes me to think the way that I think? Because then if you start questioning that, you start questioning the stereotypes that you have. And those stereotypes, where you start even asking, where did I get them from? When somebody's telling me, let me kill the other person, somebody's telling me, let me hate the other person. But even if you look at them and you realize, why am I scared of the other person? Why am I, So lack of that critical thinking makes it easy for authorities to respect, or for let me call them subjects, for citizens to extremely respect the authorities, but also fail to question some of the things that they say. And because of that, people can easily be led into extreme violence. Propaganda and manipulation. And of course, this is based on exploiting vulnerabilities. Manipulation of people occurs through their unhealed psychological wounds. People in this situation are more easily influenced by propaganda. But this is not just the unhealed wounds. It's also the things that people take dearly, the fears that they have had from before. It's all the propaganda that was built before. The problem with propaganda and manipulation is it's like a seed that when it's planted, it takes a life of its own. It's like that Chinese whisper game, where someone tells you something, but it keeps on changing. The problem with propaganda and manipulation, it grows bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, in places where there is in grouping and there are communities that have been divided so that they have the us versus them, it even flourishes much better because stereotypes easily grow in these places, and those stereotypes easily are exploited by leaders, are exploited by propagandists. In Rwanda, propaganda took a different channel. I talked about the 1970s when they started telling Hutus and Tutsis to start up with the classroom, that ethnic calling for young people in classroom all the way to the years. But they also started teaching how to kill a snake. And they would say a snake has two heads, and you can cut it on one side. And to make sure that it doesn't bite you, cut it also the other head. And it was foreshadowing on how they would kill people in the genocide, where they cut them by the Achilles tendon, but also they hit them by the head with clubs to make sure that they die. So even if somebody was to survive, by the cutting of the Achilles tendon meant that these people are going to bleed out until they die. The other part is radio station like RTLM, which was Radio Télévision de Mille Collines. And this radio and TV station started spewing out propaganda, hate speech. We can call it today modern day Twitter, modern day Facebook, modern day YouTube, where people can go on and they start. Here, it was pretty much state sponsored, where people in government, like President Habyarimana, people like Félicien Kabuga, put in money so that they can have these radio stations because the national radio station would not say everything that they wanted to say. So they came up with another radio station and people could walk through. Now, as they did that, just like today, then Rwandans listened to their radios. Oral community listened to their radios. They took stuff from the radios as biblical truth. And today we see social media. People take it rightly. And if their sentiments match with whatever they're saying, they tend to take it and say, we will go with this going forward. So we saw radio stations like RTLM blasting the best of music, having the best of DJs, but these DJs going on to divide people and also increase hate speech towards the Tutsi community. And this also manipulation does not only work on the future perpetrators or offenders, it also works on the victims where they start accepting that that's what the place where they belong and that's what they deserve. So we also see newspapers like Kangura, which pretty much said it's waking up. And then they start using them as tools to even go deeper to instigate this fear, but also to create hate speech towards Tutsis. Dehumanization. We talked about the part of Tutsis. A time comes when Tutsis who had been killed in 1959, 1963. If you look up the New York Times of 1964, one of the dates, probably September, if I remember, it talks about a genocide. And for the very first time, we hear the word used, the genocide against the Tutsi. And that part, the killings continue, 1963, going on to the late 1960s, late 1970s, late 1980s, all the way to the 1990s. But using the Bible still and propaganda, because Rwanda was 98% Christian, they start saying that the Tutsis are snakes. They start saying that the Tutsis have been given out by God to be eliminated so that they can be eliminated, to wipe them out, because they said they are sin and sin has to be eradicated. And this increased violence justified through dehumanization pretty much leads to eliminating people because the people who are going to eliminate them have accepted the idea. But also remember, from the 1970s, they are teaching who is Hutu, who is Tutsi. So as that works on the psyche of people, what is happening is they had now, whenever they say who is Tutsis are snakes, Tutsis are cockroaches, the image that comes in the young man's or young woman's mind is not an actual cockroach. Because remember, all the years, they have been told who is Hutu, who is Tutsi. And then they said a Tutsi is a cockroach, a Tutsi is a snake who needs to be killed. Then everyone sees that. But because also of years of impunity, it makes it easy to think that anything will happen to you. Because everyone is now thinking, hey, whatever is going on, even if we kill them, nothing will happen to us. But you can also think about the 10 Hutu commandments as part of the propaganda that also is part of this dehumanization. It starts talking about even a woman. Before, the body of a woman was sacred, but it now says, no, let me tell you, these women are not your friends. You cannot have them as wives. You cannot have them as secretaries. And because of that, you need to kick them out. And they get to a point, which was also repeated by one of the army officers in the Democratic Republic of Congo, of saying that even when a Tutsi woman is your wife, she's not going to deliver your children. She will pretend that it's the cousins who are coming or relatives who are coming just to bring them in to um so that they can have children with fellow Tutsis, not your children. What they're creating here in the minds of people is this thing that even in the family, that person needs to be eliminated. Now, when you talk about propaganda dehumanization, you can look up a book called Ma Mère m'a tué by an author called Charles or Karori. I forgot his other name. The book literally means my mother killed me. And with this dehumanization that I say that works not only on the going to be perpetrators, but also the victims. In this book, Charles did not write Ma Mère m'a tué. I think for him, he wrote Moi le dernier Tutsi. And the reason he said Moi le dernier Tutsi, which means I, the last Tutsi, they were saying that they're going to kill all the other Tutsis and they're going to leave him so that he can be a symbol, so that when the children are born and they ask, how did a Tutsi look like? They'll say, this is how he looked like. You can imagine. You're no longer a human being. Now you can be something that is put in a zoo, where people can use you. But also they go to a point where in the book Ma Mère m'a tué that I was trying to refer to, the author describes how his own mother got him and his siblings and took them to her own brothers so that they can kill her own children. Talk about propaganda, talk about dehumanization. Even a mother is no longer thinking that this child is mine. I'm going to take them because Tutsis are sin, because Tutsis are not supposed to live. So even those I gave birth to, I'm going to give them there. What happens with this dehumanization is it takes away the humanity of the offender before they take the humanity of the victim. And by taking away the humanity of the victims, they also take away their own humanity. And through the process, they are also dehumanized because they're no longer humane. They don't carry the values of humanity like we know them, like we have them. So here we start seeing different parts, people calling them cockroaches, people calling them snakes. And to that aspect, it also builds a divide between the community, breaking the trust that the community had. Now, the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda in 1994 is an intimate genocide. Why do I call it, or was an intimate genocide? Why do I say that it was an intimate genocide? Because it's not people from afar who came to kill you. No. It was your neighbors. It was your mother, your uncles. It was people who knew you very well, who would come and hunt for you. And there'll be a radio station also saying, these are the number of people who've been killed. These are those who have not been killed. Look for them and maybe so that they won't survive. So the dehumanization that is going on has not only been done just between communities, but it has even gone through families where people have lost their own humanity. Now, the failing state and extreme of difficult life condition and presence of war make it more likely that these conditions lead to genocide. During the late 1980s, Rwanda was experiencing the fall of prices of coffee and tea, which were the main exports. The mining industry that was pretty much led by the Belgium When they left, it never developed from that point because it was easier to get them in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But also the other aspect was as these prices started falling, the state itself, which now, when I look at failed state, I look at it in two ways. One, there will be a failed state in terms of the economy, in terms of the structure of the state, but there will also be failed state in terms of the state failing to protect its own citizens because it has taken on, it has become itself a tool to oppress. And through that, as that was happening, there were also these Rwandans who had left Rwanda in the 1959, 1960s, all the way to the 1980s, 1987, 1990, who are saying, we've been living as second-class citizens in other people's country. We want to come back. And they told them, and these were words by President Habyarimana in a refugee camp in Western Uganda. He said, I think that was 88, he said, Rwanda is like a glass full of water, which if you add in one poor person, everything will spill. Now, I think the population by then was around 6 million people, and today we're almost 14 million people. We've added double or the number of people who live in the country, and we're not spilling. And we have even foreigners, foreign nationals who live here. But here, what I'm talking about, the state failed to protect its own people. Instead, it became a tool of oppression to oppress its own citizens. But also the economy was failing, and they needed something to scapegoat to say who is causing this. And they started scapegoating all the issues back to the Tutsis. And because of that, in this pathway, we see where people come from being normal human beings to ending up becoming killers. And I'll say in the next 5 minutes, even when you look probably for those who live in the States, where are places where there is most violence? And there are areas that were redlined in the 1930s, which in Rwanda, the Belgians were giving ID cards in 1931, which eventually became a tool of genocide because then those identify who is to be killed and who is not. So as Rwandans are being divided, but also in the US, you guys are being divided. There is redlining that is happening. And then we see people turning to groups. If you go to Chicago, if you go to, gangs, the people who are mostly in poor areas, that's where you find most gangs. Now, are they the only ones? No, but these are the places where you're going to find the most gangs. What are they finding? They're finding a brother. They're finding a mentor. They're finding something and a purpose and a cause to live. And of course, you'll find that they're going to scapegoat all the issues. If they take over our streets, this is what is going to happen. But even now, foreigners, if the aliens are coming in, they're going to start eating your cats and your dogs. They come from these specific countries. I'm just running through from what I know. And then, of course, systemic discrimination. I'll not go about that. It's been many years. And what's going on with the discrimination? Destructive ideologies. These people need to go away. We need to make this place even much better. Without them, there is a better place. Let's also deny them visas. Let them not come here. Let's have these specific people, right? And then there'll be those who will speak out, but also there are those who will be silent. And we can look at it in history, even of your own country, as the US. Over many, many years, people have been killed to a place that people were being lynched, and that would be sent as a postcard to different places. Absence of voice of reason or bystanders within the community that people are living in. And then, of course, lack of critical thinking. Why do I think the way that I think? To this day, there are people who are still scared of the other. And then you'll start wondering, why do I think the way that I think? And this is a question that I want you guys to ask yourselves. Why do you think the way that you think? What caused you to think the way that you think? What are some of those things that you hold dear to yourself that actually are things that are destroying you, but also destroying the country's unity? What's your role as a person? And then, of course, propaganda and manipulation. I'll not go through that. If you look at different media houses, depending on the group they're in, you might think that, some people just hate each other. I'm sorry to say, I've been in some academic places, and I find that I'm with people that we think, there are no other people, but that's also part of that. Even some areas we're supposed to be disagreeing, but you find that most places where we think alike with certain people. And when those others that don't think like us, we tend to want to put them out so that we don't have have their opinion. And of course, through our cocoons where we are in the safe area, we start talking about them as if they're evil. We tend not to look at ourselves to wonder what makes us think the way that we think. And of course, we have not killed them because a state has not done that. But if it continues and there is a right place and the fear that is built over the other, that is also possible. Thank you very much. Those are my 44 minutes. I'll send it back to you, Peter.
Marc, thank you so much for taking us back almost 32 years.
Yeah.
And then bringing us straight to the present as well. I wanted to ask Marc,
Yes.
in the program where I'm a teacher, we talk a lot about how to analyze conflict, and we use frameworks like the one you've just taken us through. And then we try to take those learnings and apply them to strategies, to action, to so what? What can we do? And I'd
Yeah.
love to give you a chance to just talk a little bit about the work you're doing today with
Yes.
young people, where you are exploring the history, some of the history you've just taken us through. Talk to us just a bit about what that work looks like. What do you do with young people to take them through this history, to teach this history in a way that promotes healing? And just let me say, as you
Mm.
do that, I wanted to remind everyone who's watching, there is a Q&A box. So please do add some questions there as they come up. And then I will draw some questions from the Q&A box to keep the conversation going.
So for me, pretty much my work starts at 15. One of the things I was seeing, listening to survivor stories, listening to even growing up in Rwanda after 1994, I started understanding things at age 6. So I pretty much saw that divide. And I started thinking of myself as a bridge, and I called myself and my generation the bridge generation because I thought whatever decision we're going to make now is going to affect what is going to happen in the future. So the
Mm.
first thing that happened to me was me thinking, what is my role as a person before even I bring in other young people? So from there, we went into we did the first forgiveness conference, bringing in survivors and perpetrators. I'll send you a link to one of the news articles that was written about that. So how do we even go through forgiveness? And the reason for forgiveness is how do you make sure that people heal so that they don't stay in the prison of what happened to them? And many people pretty much fought it, but eventually it became a thing where those who have been healed also get a chance. The other aspect is about teaching this history. Now, when you start teaching history, the best option is to tell stories of the positivities that remain. Why? What we're looking for is how do we rehumanize the dehumanized? Because if they are still dehumanized, then they'll be in a perpetual circle of what is happening. But if we rehumanize you, then you can also get to a point of realizing that what you did is not right. Now, with
Mm.
young people who are coming from families, with me now, the older people creating intergenerational dialogues who are coming from families, we started thinking, how do we make sure that we disarm the hearts and the minds, and then that will also disarm the hands? And the way to do that, we thought of the storytelling approach. And I'm going to use one story. There is a story of Grace and Vanessa. Grace was a Hutu young lady around 10 years of age. And during the genocide against the Tutsi, she's walking towards the Democratic Republic of Congo because they were telling them that the RPF advancing army would kill them, which was not true. It was a way to get rid, to take everyone with them. But she gets somewhere and realizes there's a group of people standing, this crowd. So she comes and pushes through. And she's wondering what's going on. When she looks down, she finds a who has been hacked by a machete, but she has a baby suckling on her breast. So she asks them, "Why don't you take the baby?" They're like, "No, leave it. It's a snake. Others, it's a cockroach." She's
Mm.
like, "No, but what I see is a baby." Like, "No, no, no, keep that baby. So, I mean, don't touch that baby." So what she does is she goes and picks the baby, and the mother tells her, "Go, maybe the good Lord will save you." So when she does that, she goes, takes care of this baby. This baby has grown up. She's in her I think 30s now, early 30s. And what we teach from these stories is one, not everyone is alike. everyone has a way to think for themselves. And in order for us to disarm their hearts and minds, we need some values. And some of those empathy, critical thinking, and personal responsibility.
Mm.
Why? Empathy, can I put myself in your shoes? So that if you hurt, I also hurt. Critical thinking, why do I think the way that I think? What that I think? If Mark is telling me this thing, why is he telling me this thing? So that you can start critiquing what they're telling you, but also responsibility, not waiting for the others to be the one to take action, but you yourself taking that action. And that is something that we're doing through the storytelling approach. And through there, we can go through the conflict analysis that you've said, but based on the stories and the stories that people will never forget. I know I've told you this story, and also yourselves, you'll not forget this story. So
Mm.
through that, how do we bridge the gaps by looking at, are there people who did it in real life? And then how can we also do it? And then we go into things like listening. How do you listen? We go into forgiveness, which I talked about. We go into community activities. How do you go back and build your community through different activities? And those activities, you're not only changed by listening, but you're changed by doing. So anything that you do pretty much contributes to how you're going to change. And this is what we've been doing over and over. Yeah.
There's a question here from the audience about the role of churches in Rwanda
Mm.
to promote peace and reconciliation. And I just will use that as an opportunity to ask, what are in Rwanda some of the institutions, in addition to the memorial where you work, that you and other peace builders can lean on to contribute to some of these peace building processes?
Mm. I think the first part, at least with the current government that we have and has been in power for a few years now, is political will. There is the will by the government to make sure that people live together. So through that, it's been easy to say, all right, how do we work even towards this? Because there's that will by the government to make sure that people live together. So the first institution is pretty much the government. That is,
Mm.
whenever you start working on things that bring people together, they actually push and support it. The second one will be institutions that was the one to be built on all the other things, the army. One of the things that happens when the RPF was advancing was that the people that they arrested, they would give them a choice to either join them or to go back on the other side. And many of them joined them. And when they captured Kigali in 1994, they got over 1,400 forces to mix them. Immediately, the genocide had just ended. They said, for you guys who've been fighting with us, you're not killing people. Why don't you join us and we make one army? So we see that at the very first time, these are the places where the army now is in everywhere, and it becomes the first institution. But also with education. Education is very important. Some of the things that I'm talking about, we've created a curriculum that is now used to train young people all over Rwanda, all the way from grade 1 to grade 12, where they go through this so that they can be the ones to question. Not everything you tell me is right. I need to question it. I need to critique it. I need to go deeper so that now I can make my own choice on what's going to happen. And then let me go to the church. The church played a pivotal role. I'll talk about, for example, the Anglican Church. Now, in the genocide, the church played a part, mostly the Catholic Church, in killing the people. Um, the Presbyterian Church had a pastoral gathering, and they pretty much came in, and when they came to kill them, the same pastors were with them, go on and kill them. The Adventists would kill, and when it goes to on a Saturday, they say they're going to rest from work because they call it akazi, which literally means work, and they're going to stop. And the propaganda that was going on was also affecting churches. However, after 1994, the church becomes the first another institution that now starts even teaching healing and forgiveness. And through that, we can talk about Bishop Deoga Shagaza with the Reconciliation Village, who looks at the community and says, the community needs water, but can we build a tank in between where one house would meet with the other? And then we bring a survivor and a perpetrator who accepted their role in the genocide to live together. And through that process, the church also has been working hard and tirelessly to make sure that Rwandans live together. So
Mm.
all these are institutions, and because of political will, everything becomes easy. And of course,
Yeah.
there can never be a genocide without a government being involved. So that also tells you more about the institutions and what they're doing. So tends where the government goes, people tend to go. So that's why we need to bring to have more critical thinkers,
Mm.
responsible and empathetic people. Yeah.
Yeah, taking us back to the importance of upstanders, right? And I know you have spoken to me a bit about some of the work you are doing with young people whose parents were involved in and or impacted by the genocide, but
Mm,
who the young people, were born afterwards, or were maybe quite young.
mm,
Talk to me a bit about that, about some of that, what are the challenges for those young people? And
mm.
what is some of the work that you are doing or hoping to do to work with them?
The work that we've been doing pretty much is the healing work. The problem with a genocide is that it breaks the structure of a family. So, for example, and that also goes to the trust between the communities.
Mm,
What would happen is for those young people who pretty much many of them had their parents commit atrocities, many of them went to prison, they were in prison. So you can imagine for those who've lived in a new Rwanda without their father coming in, and then when their fathers return, the whole thing changes. One, you're walking with guilt and shame of the things that you did not do, but
mhm,
also you've been living in a Rwanda where you've moved on. Even women in the family have joined cooperatives. Now they are earning money. This gentleman, by the time he went, he women were just bowing to men and saying, "They're yes, sir." But now it's different. So even the dynamics in the family have changed, but also the people don't look at you the same way. The returning offender. Now that also affects the young people. So we can see, or we would see, that some young people would not even, that affects their confidence. That affects the way they interact with the other. That makes it look as if they have that shame. Though no one is saying that, but they walk with that fear. I remember we had trainings in 2013. And we invited young people from all over the country. And some young people would come and, this has been a few years after the genocide. And they would come and realize that the actual trainings are going to take place at the memorial and we will not see them again. So where we had planned to train around 100 young people, we started inviting somewhere around 120, 130, because many of those we thought are going not to come. And one of the reason was that guilt and shame that they were carrying, not being in this place because of the history that what happened.
yeah.
But eventually with time, with the forgiveness campaigns, learning to forgive yourself, understanding the pathway of violence, like this pathway where everyone realizes, oh, actually, it's not just me. There was a process that these people went through.
Mhm.
And it's about the choices that we make. And I can
Mm,
make my own personal choices that are not related to the other person's choices. And then you bring in stories like the story of Grace and Vanessa, but also the Nyanja students who were attacked by this militia group from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And they told them that Tutsi should be on this side, Hutus should be on this side. And they said, no, we're all Rwandans. And these teenagers were killed in 1997 because they refused. So bringing in the stories to say, hey, listen, there are people who are group thinkers who made these choices. And because of their choices, it led to the dying of many people. But you can make your own choices, which choices are going to go. But the healing process also goes on. Listening, therapy, having group activities so that young people can feel as a part of the community. So these become also a part of it. But not only the young people, we also bring in the older people because our target audiences are decision makers. Those will be parents, teachers, politicians. They are teachers because these interact with young people all the time. And then there are youth, those who are in school and those who are not in school. Why those who are not in school? Because they can easily be radicalized because usually they are the target. So we get all these so that we can create an ecosystem where people can have intergenerational dialogues. They can start projects in their own communities. They can talk about what happened through the stories that we tell them, but also in a way that does not harm them, but in a
Mm.
way that builds the values that we want. So the values are the core of what we want to happen in Rwanda. And without these values, I think it would be very difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. Mark, thank you. We're going to have to leave it there. So much more to talk about, including more questions in the chat that would send us way over time. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your work and for sharing some of it with us. Let me just close it by again giving my thanks to Mr. Marc Gwamaka. Thanks for bringing us into your world for an hour and showing us the importance of the work that you're doing, and for reminding us that these lessons from history are relevant for all countries and all people around the world. So, thanks again, Mark.
Thank you.